readers and listeners might not know what patriotic alternative is. Can you describe a little bit about that and maybe how you got involved and what sort of led you to be part of that group?
Also, Patriotic Alternative, or PA for short, is a political campaign group on the far right of the political spectrum, um, and so it's people with a range of views, but with a vaguely British nationalist ethos. And when I was a member and when I was an activist for PA, it also had aspirations to become a political party. But as far as I'm aware, it's never realized those aspirations due to repeatedly rejected by the Electoral Commission. As far as my involvement really, I was raised more on the left. Both my parents were Labour voters growing up, and kind of worked for socialist Labour. And so I was raised more on the left, and in early adulthood, migrated towards you know migrated from the left to look into different political philosophies. Um, in 2016, at a time when a lot of people were getting caught up, and it was a time when people were very divided, as they are again today. We had the big controversial election in America. We had the Brexit vote in the UK. There was a lot of political discussion in the West, a lot of memes, a lot of news, political news. And so at that time, there was also a turbulent time for me personally. There was a time when you know, I was having a difficult romantic relationship and the loss of my children at the time. And so all of that kind of coalesced, and I found myself reading far right literature, and kept it at that level of reading and online activity for a little while, as is typical. And then eventually, when PA came along, I felt that it was something I wanted to be more involved in. So I started out writing for them for their website, and my article proved quite effective for them. So they asked me to take on more of a role in kind of IRL activism. I eventually became the political organizer for the South.
So you described it, I think, in another interview as or another talk as national socialist. So in that way, I mean, is it? Do you think there was sympathy, or did you have sympathy towards the German Nazi Party?
Sure. Yeah, I was like I say, PA was a kind of mixed bag of, it was sort of broadly nationalist, but many of us were national socialists or would describe ourselves as fascist variously. And yeah, I called myself a national socialist, and I wasn't as interested in the German National Socialist Party because I'm not German, obviously. But I was very interested in. I read the books of Sir Oswald Mosley. I was very interested in his British Union of Fascists. I got a tattoo of the BUF logo on my leg. So yeah, I 100% called myself a National Socialist.
And so, just so that people can sort of understand, how do you maybe summarize your beliefs, maybe your feelings and behaviour while you're in that period of your life?
Well, there's two ways to do that really. There's one, I could tell you about the kind of political philosophy, which probably wouldn't be that useful. But there's a lot of, like any political philosophy, there's a lot of theory and political science that goes into it. But then, I think what's more important is I was angry and disenfranchised young man, and so sort of radical or extreme or whatever you want to call it, what I saw as strong and forceful solutions really appealed to me, and so I was kind of in a place where I was looking for strength and for solutions for problems that I wasn't seeing discussed in the mainstream, which is what led me to that that literature, and to that movement ultimately.
So, I mean, did you support violent action, or would you have been, for example, in favour of the uh, rioting and the violent action that's been going on in the past week or so?
No, I never condoned violence, and I always wanted to see a legal and peaceful political movement on the right, on the right. And I was always quite strict about that. Yeah.
And did you know people who were involved in that, or was that really part of PA?
No, not really. We steered clear of that. We steered clear of that.
And did you reject religion and Christianity at the time?
At that time, I remember calling myself a Christian, but I remember not being a Christian in terms of what I actually believed. Um, and I think that's often the case in politics, is that people call themselves all sorts of things for political capital. And I think I was back then. I called myself a Christian um, because that was the traditional religion of the English, and I was an English nationalist. And um, but I never opened the gospel. I never prayed. I never went to church. It wasn't. I wasn't religious. I was just calling myself religious for political capital, really.
So, what led you to start questioning those beliefs, or the being part of that group, that movement that you were involved in?
It was getting caught up in political violence, and like I say, I never enacted any political violence. None of my certainly none of my group here in the southeast were ever engaged in political violence, and I'm not aware, at least back then, of anyone in PA engaging in political violence. Um, but we certainly were on the receiving end of it, and so I got attacked a couple of times, and on one particular incident was quite badly mobbed in Sevenoaks, in Kent, and that was a big turning point for me, because it was a moment of clarity. There's a special kind of clarity that you get when you're on the floor being kicked by dozens of people, and you just think, why are we here? Why is this happening? um, and and you look up and think, these are exactly the kind of young men, young British men, who I talk about in my articles, and when I'm talking to my political comrades. Um, these are the kind of people I talk about wanting to help, and um, and here we are, and they're kicking the hell out of me. And so, how do we get to this point of enmity? Um, and so there's a moment of clarity where I saw the absurdity of the kind of political games I was engaged in, and which is what led me to that reevaluation.
And who was it who was beating you?
It was broadly like anti-fascist groups, as they call themselves, anarchist groups. One being, there were some Antifa members there, and there's another group, similar group called Football Lads Against Fascism, I think they call themselves, if I remember rightly. And so there was a couple of left-wing extremist groups who came together and managed to catch me before thankfully it was before an event, so it was just me waiting for people to arrive, so nobody else got badly attacked. There were a couple of people who got caught up in it as well, but by and large it was me who took the brunt of it, thankfully. So yeah, it was a couple of sort of radical left-wing groups basically.
So after that moment of clarity, like what was the process then of that? What some might call de-radicalization, or what was the process of questioning those beliefs, and what happened?
Yeah, it was. I mean, first of all, it was kind of a breaking down process because after that, it was something which by that point, I had been a nationalist for years at that point, and I had been involved in political activism for quite some time at that point, and so this was kind of my day-to-day life and my worldview, and I kind of saw it crumbling, and it started to look very absurd to me, what I was doing and what I believed and what I was involved in. Just sort of, yeah, absurd and senseless. And so, what happens when you lose all your worldview and your day-to-day life and cease to see the point of it, um, is you lose purpose and you kind of break down. And so I did. I had a mental breakdown and and quit my position with PA. Also quit my day job that I had at the time, because I broke down and I was racked with depression and anxiety because I just didn't know what I believed or what anything meant anymore to me. And so um, yeah, so it was a very dark time for me. Um, and then my father suggested I try prayer, um, and he sent me a little book by Metropolitan Callistus Ware of blessed memory, who was a Orthodox bishop in England and wrote a little book about the Jesus Prayer. And so I said, okay, I'll try it. Not thinking that it was going to do me much good, but not really knowing what else to do. So I started a daily practice of prayer. Um, and as I say, I couldn't really cope with working or going out and doing things. I was pretty much housebound at that point. But I thought, okay, this is something I can do, even in that state. I can sit and say a prayer, um, and then say another one and say another one, and see where it goes. So I started praying, and then a friend of mine gave me um, a old King James Bible, and I started reading the Gospel, started reading Genesis and the Psalms, and that was the start of my kind of journey towards Christianity.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about that journey? Like how did the prayer, the Jesus prayer, and the reading the Bible, how did that start to affect you?
It started to, well, it gave me a purpose first of all. That there were things that I could actually do, even if I didn't believe any of it yet, even if I didn't know what any meant yet. I could just trust that there's some meaning in this practice of prayer and in this stuff that I'm reading in the scriptures. And and then as I delved more into it, and as I was kind of infused with prayer and with the scriptures I was reading started to sink in, um, and I started to see that I started to comprehend the gospel and to understand that there was um, truly good news to you know to look at. It wasn't all horror and senselessness, which is what I had ultimately found in secular politics. It was, there was a world of meaning there, and goodness and truth and beauty, um, you know, and so I started to see that and to realize that, and I started to see it also in other people, which was quite a shock to me, having been a very kind of laser focused um, ideologue for a long time. um, to start visiting churches, because the obvious thing to do when you start praying and you start reading the scriptures, and then you think, okay, maybe I should join a church, and and there are a load of churches out there, so you start going to visit different churches and speaking to Christian people, um, and many of whom aren't the kind of people that I mixed with in my political days. Um, Many of whom were, of people of different races and immigrants and so on and so forth. And so, but I started to see that these people, when I was reading um, about the divine image and the idea of the the holiness of the human person, and and um, and about seeing Christ in one's neighbor. Um, and I started to see that in people, and I thought, he's there, and I was always closed off to it, and then I started to see little glimpses of it, um, and so, which was a big step for me, definitely.
So could you describe, is there a particular maybe encounter that you had with somebody of a different of a different race, or anybody who you would previously have had not seen that divine image? Can you remember a particular encounter that helped to open your mind to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the story I want to tell. One of the first churches I visited, um, when I had been praying for a while and got myself to a point where I could go out again and start to speak to people and visit churches, was I went to a local Protestant church, um, and um, and met a few people, and one in particular was very welcoming. Um, a gentleman who was the utter antithesis of anyone I would have associated with before. He was an immigrant from Asia, and he was a homosexual man. He called himself gay, so he was not someone you would expect someone like me in my political days to gel with at all. Um, and yet he was wonderfully welcoming. He was the most welcoming person I had met you know since I could remember. Because people aren't like that. They're not warm and and um, and loving to strangers and to people who have judged them previously. That's not how I was used to people behaving. Um, and that's exactly what he did. He welcomed me, even though I was open about who I had been and what I had believed. Um, he, it wasn't even a process of forgiveness. He forgave me right off the bat. And for any, you know, enmity I might have felt towards him in the past, and to people like him. And he welcomed me. He gave me a my first cross. He gave me a wooden cross, which I still have in my bedroom to this day. Um, and he was just, you know, a godsend, true, um, a true disciple, and someone who really showed forth the image of Christ into my life, and where I least expected it, where I would have least expected it as someone coming from that political background.
So it sounds like you've had a real, like a complete change of mind or heart. How would you describe it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's complete. It's probably ongoing. At least I hope so. But um, but yeah, I would call it radical. I'm not a fan of the word de-radicalization. Um, Purely it's there's this idea that people on the fringes just need to come back into the sort of liberal center of politics and then they'll be fine. Um, which I don't think. First of all, it's not very appealing. Like if somebody had tried to convince me of that back in my political days, I would have said no thanks. Because I had already rejected that kind of mainstream of politics. So so I wouldn't describe it at all as de-radicalization. Um, I would say I'm more radical now than ever, because at that time I was playing the same kind of political games that my counterparts on the other side of the aisle were, whereas now I'm not interested in those um, political games. I'm interested in the gospel. I'm interested in Jesus Christ, and in trying to serve uh, my neighbor as best I can, wretched as I am. Um, so so I would describe it as a process of um, not so much of de-radicalization, but of really of healing. Because like anyone, the reason I went to that extreme in the first place, um, the reason I looked to fringe philosophies um, for answers is because I had been disillusioned, and I was hurting, and I was angry and disenfranchised, and um, but ultimately didn't find answers or goodness or beauty in those the fascist literature or anything like that. I ultimately found what I was looking for in this process of healing, which um, God in His grace opened to me.
It sounds like you've had an encounter with God's love.
Mm.
So, how have you felt? Obviously, the past week or so has been turbulent in the UK, and the question of far right activity is certainly being discussed, debated, and so on. How have you felt watching what's been happening, and what do you think about it? What's your how are you sort of interpreting events?
Well, one thing, well, I would say there's been a build-up of tension and frustration in this country for a long time. That's something which I kind of tapped into myself back in my political days. Writing and speaking at events and things like that. I was consciously tapping into this tension, which has continued to build up even in the years since I left politics, and now I think has reached a sort of fever pitch, um, and inevitably so, and has spilled out into the streets. Um, the way I interpret it is, I would say that there's a lot of um, name calling involved, and there's a lot of condemnation involved in the news cycle and in the things that I've heard politicians and talking heads and people saying, none of which I think is helpful. So, we've heard a lot about far right thugs, um, many of whom I don't think are even, they're certainly not, I wouldn't call them far right in any ideological sense. I think the majority of them are um, looking at the map and looking at where these things have flared up, where the rioting has been. They seem to be um, happening mostly in deprived Labour constituencies. So I think it's a case of people who have been lived lived in deprivation for a long time, have suffered with some of the implications of mass immigration policies brought in by Labour during the New Labour era, um, and I think they feel betrayed because of that, and it's built up. That tension has built up to a point where uh, the sad events which occurred in Southport um, prior to these protests and riots, um, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. But I think those tensions have been built for a long time. And in the response of many of the Muslim communities who have responded and who themselves have been out on the street, again, those tensions in those communities have been building for a long time, because they're also suffering many of the consequences of those old labor policies of mass immigration, of very poorly handled mass immigration, I should say, bundling everyone into these sort of separate communities which have no hope of assimilation, really. And so, as far as my interpretation, I would say I don't think it has very much to do at all with um, political philosophy, despite what the kind of mainstream media and what many politicians have suggested. I don't think it has much to do with far right ideology or any kind of ideology. I think it's a build up of tensions, um, and I would say those tensions are probably given the response, um, given the fact that the response has just been mainly um, condemnation um, and a lot of back and forth, you know, politicking and name calling. Um, I would say I think those tensions are probably going to continue to rise um, in the coming months and years.
So what do you believe is the solution to the problem these problems?
The solution would, well, I wouldn't say there's any any sort of straightforward or simple solution that I can provide, but it would be it has to be some kind of reconciliation. It has to be um, in the rule of Saint Benedict, Benedict forbids his brethren to give each other what he calls false peace, and so false peace would be like just ignoring a problem, saying, "Oh, I'm too tired for this. We'll just go to bed and we'll sort it out another time," and then the tension just rises. Um, so what I would say, let's not give each other false peace. Let's address these things. Something which I was particularly disappointed to hear um, recently was at a press conference when the Prime Minister was asked about the motivations for the protest, about the grievances which have built up in people's hearts, and his response to that question was to say it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter why people are upset, why they're angry, why they're protesting, why they're out on the streets looting or getting violent. It doesn't matter why. We're just going to punish them and sort of squash the problem. Um, but that's, again, that's another kind of false peace. That's just going to, you're just putting the problem back in a box to fester. Um, and so the solution is, you know, um, must involve at least acknowledging that people have real grievances and that people are really hurting, and this isn't happening for no reason. It's not happening just because people read some far right literature online and then suddenly they're writing. Um, it's happening because people do have real issues that they're bearing on their backs, and it's too heavy for them, and they need help, and they need understanding and compassion. Um, and so instead of calling them thugs and saying it doesn't matter why they're out on the streets, um, I think, especially as Christians, we should um, we should look at people and see them as people who are hurting, and try to understand them, and see how we can serve them, and rather than condemn them. Something that's come into my mind repeatedly um, over the past week is the gospel about the woman caught in adultery, and that story is quite instructive here, I think, because in that story, first of all, you have two people caught in adultery, and one who is going to be punished, and one who's allowed to go free. Right? They drag off the woman, and the man they're allowed to go free. So resolution for this, I think we have to not do that. We can't look at certain people and say these people are far right thugs, we need 24-hour courts, we need a special police force, we're going to enact the full force of the law against them, and then look at other people and say, oh, we'll be much more understanding towards them because people are resentful now. People remember a few years ago when we had the Black Lives Matter riots and everyone was very understanding and compassionate about the grievances behind that unrest. And the response here has been completely different. People haven't forgotten those things, and that's going to raise the tension for sure. So there's an issue of selective justice or two-tier justice there. And then going back to the gospel, there's the element of not condemning someone. Like the woman caught in adultery really was caught in adultery. She had done something wrong, and the people out there looting and rioting, that's wrong, obviously. And the people out there getting violent, that's wrong, obviously. But it doesn't mean we just condemn them and leave it there. It doesn't mean that they just need to be punished, like the woman in the story who was set to be stoned. What the Lord says is He says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And then we realize, like, oh, I'm not so different to these people, and I like people to be compassionate towards me and understanding towards me. So perhaps I should serve them in the same way. And then he goes on to say, neither do I condemn you. When everyone realizes, I have no right to condemn these people, and they put down their stones and they leave. And then the Lord says, neither do I condemn you. Go forth and sin no more. So I would say the main thing is this sense of two-tier justice, which is frustrating the possibility of reconciliation at the moment. That has to change, and secondly, and more importantly, the in our own hearts, we have to stop condemning each other and stop being at odds with one another. Set aside that enmity and that condemnation, and accept that we have to love our neighbors, and that's an important thing for Christians. Need to lead the way in that, because that's essential to our faith, and so we have something to offer the nation in that gospel, and in that sense of serving one's neighbor and loving one's enemy and not judging, not condemning. That's the approach that needs to be taken if you want not false peace, not just to put the thing back in a box and let it fester, but if you want true healing, that's how it has to go. It has to be compassion.
Theo, what would your message be to anybody who is feeling drawn towards kind of these kind of angry or extreme or far right ideologies, including maybe people who have been drawn to like Islamic extremism or whatever, wherever they sit or whatever their culture is? What would your message be to somebody who is getting drawn into that kind of way of thinking and being?
I would say there are all kinds of good reasons you might be attracted to the far right or the far left or Islamism or these kinds of ideologies, because you have genuine grievances, you're hurting, whether you know it or not. We're all hurting, and we all need healing, and so I would say it's understandable that you're looking for that healing, for that purpose, in those places, but I would say you're not going to find it there. What you're going to find is there's a verse from a psalm about a man who tries to build a house without the Lord's help, and and it's all vain, it's pointless, because where are your efforts going to get you? So I would say, that's what you're going to find in these kinds of ideologies. You'll find, yeah, an outlet for your own grievances, for your own hurt, but you won't find healing and you won't find true purpose. Um, you will only find that in Christ, and you will only be at peace in Him. And so I would say, um, give Him a chance, because if you give Him a chance, He will show you that, and He will show you His peace, and and He will not ask what those ideologies will ask of you. They will ask a hell of a lot of you, and you will wake up years from now and find that you have been diminished in some ways by that. You've become somebody um, you never set out to be, because that's what these kind of ideologies do to people. That's certainly what happened to me, um, and it's not worth it. It's not worth being diminished in that way. Um, it's not worth the enmity and the hurt that you might cause for other people. Um, so I would say, yeah, give the Lord a chance, give Christ a chance um, to heal you, because He wants to. He's got um, He's got everything you need, and His yoke is light, and um, all He needs is that chance. He just wants you to come and see, and He'll show you. So I would say, I'm kind of dancing around the point, because it's I don't really have my own message. It's just give Him a chance, because He has the only message worth hearing, and so um, give Him a chance to show you.